All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We want to welcome everybody. We still got a number of you still logging into the room, and want to thank all of you, and a number of you who showed up early, so you get extra credit for that. But want to welcome all of you to this month's Beyond Compliance series. And we have a really exciting topic, clearly a very hot topic. I think one of our biggest registrations we've had to date. So we're excited to share this with you this month. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we'll be getting into strategies for a successful gluten-free certification program with Paul Valder, and I'll give you a little more about his background as well. But speaking of backgrounds, we see a lot of new faces, which is always exciting. So I thought I'd give you a little context around our series here. Beyond Compliance is a webinar and podcast series that we created, and we've been doing a number of educational webinars for the industry for years. But one of the pieces of feedback we got was that the community was really looking for that tangible kind of takeaways that they could apply to their business. So not just conceptual, not just updates on FSMA, that sort of thing, but really what's going on out there, what are the best practices, and how can they apply them to their facilities. And so we have created this webinar and podcast series for you. We have different topics and presenters each month. The idea is to bring together, the best thought leaders and the topics that are really relevant to you, practitioners that are in the field, consultants that are out there helping companies, and really share and disseminate down to the things that that you can take away and apply in your business. So you'll get a lot of really good nuggets today. So I hope you're ready to take some good notes. Again, we make these for you. So if you have ideas and topics you're interested in, we certainly welcome you to share those with us. We also obviously put these on at free of no charge. So for all of our community, it's important to us to continue to give back. You'll hear a lot of really great tips and strategies and stuff from the trenches today. And at Safety Chain, we're a cloud-based food quality management system. So if you're looking for ways to apply a lot of what you've learned today, we have the solutions to do that in the areas of food safety, food quality, and supplier compliance. So we are very, very proud and excited to offer the series to you. And if we add some value and you are looking for a way to implement some software to run things smarter, faster, better, we've got some pretty exciting stuff going on. We'd love to share more with you when the time is right. So a few little housekeeping tips before we dig into the good stuff. One is I hope you'll find the format fun and interesting. We try and set this up in a sense like if we were sitting around chatting at a trade show, right? That's kind of the format in which we're trying to do that. So we want to encourage you to ask questions. We will attempt to carve out some time at the end, depending on how we go with time. We always like to make sure we end on time, but we want to encourage you to fire away questions. There's a little question box where you can submit those. Conversely, if you have any technical related issues, you can send those over via the chat box, and we have a couple of folks standing by to help you as best we can there. So ask away with the questions. We'll also have a few, 2 or 3 poll questions too, so stay tuned for those, and encourage you again to engage and participate in all of those. You'll also know that only the panelists are displayed, so if you're asking questions, they're going to come to us, but we're not displaying them to the entire audience that's here with us today. And I'll cover right up front one of the most common questions that come up, that we are recording this, and Paul has been kind enough to allow us to share both the recording and a copy of the deck at the conclusion of the webinar. So we usually tidy those up and send those out within a few days of wrapping up here. So whether you couldn't get enough or you want to share it with a colleague, friend, we will make all of that available to you as well. And again, that's why we're so very grateful for the presenters that come today to share the wisdom they have, because we can continue to store and share that in our library. Last but not least, if you have any audio issues, there's 2 ways to get audio today. One is through your computer. You'll also see there's an option to click dial in, and usually if you're having issues with one, sometimes the magic is simply just changing to the other, and you can always log out and log back in, and sometimes that does the trick as well. If not, we've got a couple people on standby who'll do their best to help you behind the scenes if you get stuck. So with that, we're going to dig in here, and I want to give you a little bit of a background around our presenter. I think many of you have either seen him speak or read some of his work, or maybe have used him in your organizations, but Paul Valder is the president and CEO of the Allergen Control Group, which are owners of the Gluten-Free certification program. We'll refer to that today as the GFCP. The only preventative gluten-free manufacturing certification standard founded on globally recognized food safety management principles. Paul's also the founder and CEO of Toronto-based Paul Valder Consulting, PVC, which since 2007 continues to provide independent, first-in-class, risk-based and professional support services to the food industry. PVC is fully equipped to help organizations throughout the value chain meet increasing customer, regulatory, and consumer requirements when it comes to globally recognized food safety and quality management standards. And in addition to being a very hot topic, we're really lucky to have Paul here today as probably one of the premier leading experts on this topic, a great resource for us as for you. So with that, Paul, I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way and get to the good stuff. So thank you for being here. We're really excited to have you this month.
Well, gee, thank you very much, Brian. I think that was a tremendous background and introduction. Gee whiz, I can live up to your standard there. But it's thank you very much. I think it's a great segue into the fact that management systems and food safety and quality programs have come a long way in the last 15 or 20 years that we've seen, especially in North America. And the advent of technology being introduced to help more efficiently manage the inundation of requirements that we all get as manufacturers, brand owners, throughout the supply chain. We're becoming more and more dependent on that technology to help us deliver on what we need to all deliver on. So whether that's customer-driven requirements or whether that's regulatory requirements, obviously this is a nice fit, and being associated with Safety Chain, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
So Allergen Control Group, just as a starting point here on the first slide, just to give you a little background, you may recognize some rebranding going on here. We're in a transition period because as of March, we were acquired by the BRC Global Standards Group out of the United Kingdom. And I'm sure most of us are familiar with BRC Food Standards as one of the benchmark standards under the Global Food Safety Initiative. I assure you that that's not going to skew our thinking today. It's business as usual for Allergen Control Group, and we look forward to supporting any of the global food safety standards in the marketplace today. So I maybe we can just move to the next slide. So again, mentioning here that we, and thank you, Brian, for that intro, but just to reinforce, we own, manage, administer, and market the Gluten-Free certification program, and we're really proud that we have strategic long-term partnerships with the leading celiac organizations as well to help provide the value add for the brand side of the business that, where they, the brands can actually use those organizations' trademarks and to endorse their products with consumers directly. Just trying to advance the next slide. So if we talk a little bit about the marketplace for a moment and give you a little background on the market. Waiting for the slide to advance here.
Yeah, are you guys clicking through, or do you need me to do that for you, Paul? You should be able to go ahead and click forward on those.
Yeah, we're trying to do that. We're having a little bit of
no problem.
I can ask you to do that.
I can do it for you. No problem.
Thank you very much. Just a quick background on celiac disease, since that's the principal topic we're going to talk about today. For those of you that don't know, it's a serious autoimmune disease. It's triggered by the consumption of gluten, and typically what it does when somebody's affected with this is it attacks the small intestinal lining, particularly what they call the villi, which are the the pieces of the intestine that actually absorb all the nutrients and minerals that we need to grow our and grow our bodies and be healthy. And we know that for a fact through our associations that, you know, if it's left untreated, there are so many other associated complications and diseases with celiac disease. Has over 700 different symptoms associated with it, and that's one of the reasons it takes so long for a celiac to get diagnosed, on average of approximately 10 years. So, you know, creating more awareness for this, and also understanding that celiacs really have no alternative medicine to treat this. They get pointed by their doctor to their local Kroger store or Walmart and saying, you know, have a nice day, go shopping, and the rest is left up to them, and they have to adhere to a strict gluten-free diet for life. So it's kind of a challenge. Maybe we can advance, Brian, please.
Sure, no problem.
So in North America, gluten is defined as any of the grains that are derived from barley, wheat, rye, triticale, which are hybrids, wheat, obviously, as I mentioned, but a lot of the pulses are also affected with or contaminated. And oats are highlighted here particularly because oats are gluten-free. However, commodity-based oats, which is the majority of the oats we find, are highly contaminated and must be sort of treated or called out separately when you're making a claim for gluten-free. We'll talk a little bit about that later on again. So next slide, please. So in Canada and the United States, there's regulations around gluten-free claims. Some of the similarities are that they're a voluntary claim. Gluten-free is a voluntary claim. When we look at enforcement by CFIA or FDA, it's usually lumped under misbranding. So many of the recalls we see are because labels have been incorrectly processed, and they're recalled for some kind of claim or non-disclosure that's not correct. But both Canada and the United States will allow up to 20 parts per million of gluten in the final product, and there's testing that can be done. All, you know, government regulatory people and ourselves and so forth recommend AOAC testing methodologies if companies are going to test within their facility or even send out their samples for third-party testing. Both disallow the intentional addition of gluten into the process, manufacturing process, so you can't sort of start with let's say 200 parts per million of an ingredient coming in the back door and process it out to under 20 parts per million going out the front door. So it needs to, you need to control, you know, and have that supplier piece nailed down very well. And obviously, once you get into the plant and the manufacturing facility, cross-contamination and cross-contact is the key to managing this effectively. And obviously is not considered an ingredient at that point. Both Canada and the United States really encourage a management system approach, and this is where you know, a safety chain comes in, and because it is a management system technology platform. And I think that you know, if you take your existing management system approach to this and you know, control gluten in a management system versus just relying on random end product testing, you're meeting a lot of the FSMA type requirements for preventive controls, and you're also going to reduce your risk associated with any possible recall. Next slide. Thanks, Brian. Some of the differences, though, between countries, if you're shipping product cross-border, you're going to need to understand that In Canada, the gluten-free regulation is part of what they call a special dietary food requirement. So you're going to need to make sure you're aware of those Canadian regulations. In Canada, we have CFIA, who is the enforcement body, and Health Canada, who sort of make the regulations. In the United States, the challenge is we work with the US FDA, who have their regulation on gluten, but USDA and TTB do not have an associated regulation for gluten. So there's three different bodies, three different interpretations of how they enforce the or not enforce the regulation. So very different landscape in the U.S. market. And in Canada, if you're shipping a product, making a gluten-free claim onto the shelves, retail shelves in Canada, you must really be aware of the oats issue here. Oats technically are restricted from making a gluten-free claim. However, under what they call a special marketing authorization process, you can make a gluten-free claim on products containing oats as long as you call out gluten-free oats or specially processed on the label. So again, very important to note that you need to call out your oats as being specially processed or specifically gluten-free oats on that package. So the regulation that came out in 2012 actually now in Canada, addressing allergens, gluten, and sulfites, basically puts them all in the same bucket. So you know, if you're not calling out an allergen, gluten, or sulfite on the product label, then it's deemed to be by Health Canada as being free from that ingredient. So a very different kind of regulation. So again, I'm just going to reinforce that because it's kind of sometimes people have a problem getting their heads around that a little bit. But basically, if you're not calling out the ingredient or the allergen, I should say, or gluten or sulfites on the label, then the regulators deem it to be free from that ingredient. Just thanks. Next slide. So if you're setting it up here for understanding the market, obviously there isn't really a market, a business case, I should say, for 1% of celiacs around the world. So again, 1% are diagnosed with celiac disease. 6 to 8%, and these are conservative numbers, I will say, are diagnosed medically to have a gluten sensitivity. Meaning that group also needs to eat gluten-free as a means to eliminate any effects of negative effects of gluten. So that's about 8 to 10% of the population that must be on a strict gluten-free diet. But the business case is not just for that 8 or 10%, but when you add what we call the avoiders to the equation, which is approximately another 25% of the population, you can see that all of a sudden now you've got a substantial number of consumers purchasing gluten-free products in the grocery store. We know that it's well over 50%. So not an insignificant number of those consumers purchasing gluten-free products today. It still is, by the way, the fastest growing free from claim in the marketplace. So it's still growing. It's still a trending, not fatting. It's still trending, I call it, upwards. The numbers have dropped off slightly in terms of the exponential growth, but we're still seeing just under 10% growth each year in the gluten-free market. So still significant. It certainly warrants attention if you're a marketer or a manufacturer. Next slide. This is a little bit of numbers showing 5 years of back to 2015. So it's actually, as I said, we're still seeing an average of about 10% growth, but you can see how it has boomed over the last few years. This is the packaged facts numbers. Next slide. One of our partners in Philadelphia, the Beyond Celiac folks, they were formerly known as the National Foundation for Celiac Awareness, conducted a study in 2016 to see how important certification was on gluten-free products for consumers. And you can see that over 90% of consumers believe that certification in the gluten-free space is important in their buying decisions. And that's why you have people like Whole Food Markets, other major retailers requiring that all gluten-free products, whether they're their own brands or store brands or whether they're national brands, carry some sort of certification. So interesting numbers. Next slide.
Yeah, Mark, I think we got our first poll question coming up. So Jen, if you want to fire this up for us, for everybody, if you don't mind taking a quick minute to give us a yes or no. Are you currently producing or offering gluten-free products right now? So Jen, go ahead and get that going. All right. Jen, do you have the poll going there? Make sure, let's see if I can see if that's.
Yes, I do. We've got about 81% responded, and looks like we're getting ready to show responses.
All right, go ahead and do that. So this will probably be helpful for you, Paul, to have a sense of who's in the room here on the percentages there. Can you see those on your screen?
Oh, 69, 70% are currently offering, which is very important. And so I'm hoping that we can, and 31% are not, or maybe thinking about it. So I hope that the next segment will actually provide an understanding of the importance of a management system approach to controlling the gluten-free risks. So yeah, let's get on with it.
Let's do it.
So next slide, we're going to talk about gluten management and what is the big problem that everybody, if there's so many certifications out there that address this, and there's what's the big issue here for manufacturers and brands? And believe me, it is not a level playing field. I wish I could say that all gluten-free programs and certifications are created equal, much like the Global Food Safety Initiative with all the global food standards are benchmarked as equivalent, but I must say that that is not the case in the gluten-free world. So maybe the next slide would be, Brian, would be great. We take a really different approach at Allergen Control Group with respect to the gluten-free claim. We look at gluten-free claims as a food safety issue because people get sick. If there is a claim and there is gluten contained in the product or is above acceptable limits. By the way, as an FYI, the under 20 parts per million that was established by Codex, the world's authority on allergens and food safety benchmarking standards, they have established many years ago that under 20 parts per million was safe for the majority of celiacs. And I stress the majority only because the under 20 part per million sort of threshold, if you will, is based on not restricting access of products and choice, quality. We still need to develop products, innovate new products, provide access for these for this group, this celiac group, to be able to go shopping with confidence, and yet and make it affordable for everybody to get involved in the opportunity, and yet have consumers be able to purchase products that are still affordable. So all those things come into play. I mean, if you when you sort of set thresholds. And we're fortunate that with gluten, we do have a threshold. With all other allergens, as we know, there are no thresholds, and it makes it very challenging to manage this in a manufacturing environment, given the different types of processes that we all undergo. So, however, I will tell you that allergens are still the #1 cause of recall around the world. It's still a huge focus for everybody, and a continuing challenge as new allergens come into play in different countries. So if we look at this chart, for example, this is the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's recall history over the last couple of years. We can see that gluten by itself is fairly limited in terms of the number of recalls. But I want to point out on the next slide, if you can advance it for me, Brian, and the next one, if you don't mind. If you look at gluten recalls and you look at wheat recalls, and of course, and you combine those two, because both those would be considered a gluten-free recall. You look at about 18% of all those recalls in Canada, anyway, and you'll find it very similar throughout, the United States and other developed countries. 18% of recalls are either gluten or wheat related, so you can see that that starts to get fairly significant. And as we said earlier, the majority of those recalls are for mislabeling issues. They're not necessarily all food safety related issues. So you can see why we're passionate about doing it right. Next slide. And of course, the fallout from having a recall, as we all know, is very damaging to the brand, and we do not. Obviously we want to be able to sleep at night and know that our products are safe, and that we are not in jeopardy of being on a Facebook page or on the front page of the paper, or being, having to pull back millions of boxes of product and millions of dollars in damages. So without saying too much on the Cheerios piece, it was 1.2 million boxes of Cheerios in the U.S. market. They're gluten-free Cheerios, and really the lawsuit was not really a food safety issue, although they did have a small percentage of illnesses reported to CDC in Atlanta. The actual issue there was the court case was really a class action on mislabeling. So again, next slide. And what about testing? Everybody talks about testing as the silver bullet. Well, I hate to break it to everybody, it's not a silver bullet. There's a lot of question around testing still. Even the test kit manufacturers will attest to that. So we know that science confirms that, when you're doing end product testing alone, it lacks reliability, especially when you have different processes that you're looking at, whether it's hydrolyzation, fermentation, all these different processes certainly affect the reliability of the testing regime. So, that means low validity at the end. And it can get very expensive, and this is where you need to look at your gluten-free certification program or certifier, because if you're having to test every single batch you've got, and every single product, maybe there are better ways to deal with this. And it's very time consuming, obviously, and then, the risk of failure or recall or damage to the brand is much greater. So let's move on. Thank you. Here's a great slide that I like to explain to people, because this really sums up a number of issues. Number one, you've got 4 different products being made in 4 different plants. You've got 4 different certification marks on a store brand. Now, if I were the store brand here, I would be concerned, because number one, I spent a lot of money on the Live G-Free brand. I've created beautiful packaging. I've created a new brand, and so if I'm appealing to consumers here, particularly the gluten sensitive and celiac consumer, I'm actually creating a lot of confusion here, because I don't know as a consumer what all these different marks mean. Not only that, so now we've got a different risk level for the brand, the manufacturing process in 4 different plants. And I've got a real problem with my consumer-facing message here, because if I'm depending on any one of those competitive celiac organizations to go out and tell the world how great my brand is, they're going to have a real issue with that, because they're all competitors here. So now you've got a brand message issue to deal with. I can't leverage that relationship with any one of those organizations, or we're going to go out and seem to have some feedback there, Brian. There we go. Okay, thank you. So we got 2 issues. We got an assurance risk, a food safety assurance issue at the supplier level, and we've got a marketing issue, because we can't really go out and leverage the consumer celiac groups there. So 2 issues, and that the brand to be aware of. Next slide. Interrupt. Do you hear that feedback, Brian?
I do. We have everybody muted, so I'm not sure if that's coming in on your side there or not, but if you have that handset, you might try that as well.
Yeah, no, it's not on our side, because when I mute it, it's still there. Okay.
Okay.
So what's the solution then for these issues? We like to propose that, let's not reinvent the wheel here. Let's look at what science has said. Let's look at proven systems and the approach for controlling gluten and gluten cross-contamination within a facility. Let's look at what's coming in the back door. What are those ingredients? How are you getting the assurances from your suppliers that those ingredients are clean and you're starting clean? And how do you manage that process throughout the manufacturing stage, all the different stages, right to final product? So we're not saying that testing is, we all need testing as a tool in the toolbox, but it's not the silver bullet. It's not the only thing we want to rely on. So we look at a globalized set of standards that could be applied around the world in any environment. When we went to work with PepsiCo and Walmart and people like that, they want to know that the standard can be applied, whether it's in Thailand or whether it's in, New York. So we had to come up with a standardized approach, less prescriptive approach, if you will, and rely on risk-based management systems. And then how do we provide a credible, trustworthy mark for the brand at the point of purchase that differentiates themselves from just a GF mark, let's say, or a self-declaration? Next point. Next slide, sorry. So we look at the program as it sits today. It's regarded so far by our major brands and manufacturers as sort of a gold standard to ensure gluten-free products. I will tell you it's the only management system for gluten-free that's accredited under ANSI/ANAM in Washington, under 17021, which is a management system, and therefore it provides real credibility and arm's length rigors to a third-party approach where all the auditors who audit in this program are food auditors. They're all existing GFSI auditors that then go through specialized training in this program before they're able to work for a licensed certifying body to audit in a manufacturing environment. Again, this program we've designed to manage the production of gluten-free products, and it aligns directly with the FSMA and the new Safe Food for Canadians Act rules. It also meets or exceeds global regulations and will combine with your existing food safety system. So if you are SQF or BRC or you have an IFS or FSSC program, this is just going to fit into that system, again, not recreating a new system for you. We always recommend it sits within the allergen program, and you call out gluten requirements within your allergen program separately. And at the end of the day, by doing all this, you're going to reduce costs in your program. You're going to combine audits. You're going to reduce the risk of product failure and your dependency on and costs associated with product testing as well. So again, you need product testing, but you probably don't need as much as you're doing with if you have a proper management system in place, because your testing is going to be directly related to the risk assessments. And at the end of the day, you're going to be confident that you can use a mark on product or in your marketing, if you're a manufacturer, to attract new customers, a mark that's going to be trusted by consumers. Next slide. So in short, the benefits for suppliers, obviously, you can this program can be implemented with a dedicated, if you're a dedicated gluten-free facility, or if you're a non-dedicated or shared facility. We've worked with many manufacturers and customers to help them implement these programs. You're going to gain operational efficiencies through combined audits, reduce testing costs, reduce likelihood of recall, and thus brand protection benefits. You're also going to be able to expand the potential for attracting new business as you get listed, similar to the other GFSI schemes. You get listed in our certified facility directory, so that we have a lot of brands coming to us looking for co-manufacturing or co-packing arrangements. And again, I always like to say it promotes corporate social responsibility, because this is a very unique group that you're going to be attracting to purchase your products. Celiacs and the gluten sensitive, best label readers in the world. Their shopping experience is miserable, so if they can identify with the mark, they are going to build trust. You're going to build trust in that consumer, and they are, by the way, the most loyal shoppers as well, so they will continue to repurchase your product. Next slide. Thanks, Brian. Quickly, just to kind of be aware of time here, we did some marketing through PepsiCo, who were one of our first customers back in 2012. They went out to their group and PR group and talked to consumers about the trademarks that were in the marketplace. We were proud to say that ours came back as sort of the most official looking, very eye-catching, and viewed as sort of more credible, the sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval, if you will. And I will tell you today that in the North American market anyway, that the name of the Celiac Association on your product package drives that confidence with consumers. It's the only one out there that has the name of the association clearly on the package, and not just a GF mark. Next slide.
I think we're good for the next poll questions. So you can take a quick second here to give us your thoughts. When are you considering a gluten-free certification? We know some of you are already working on that or have one, but Jen, if you want to fire that up real quick. I think, Paul, this will give you, again, some more helpful context here. Give you just a few moments, not minutes. Hopefully it's not that hard of a question. Jen, when you think you've got a good sample, we'll go ahead and fire up the results there. All right, there you go, Paul. Can you see those on your screen there?
Yeah, I sure can, Brian. So, you know, obviously there's quite a few that are about half that are actually looking for certification currently, so that's encouraging. 3 months, 7%, 6 months, 10%, obviously, and you know, within the next year, over 20% considering certification. So, you know, that's terrific. You know, at various stages in that process, folks are going to need either some help coaching or you know, coaching them through the process, maybe some consulting or training work. So you know, those are all things that you know, we would be welcome the opportunity to support people, and feel free to let us know. So the audit and certification process, I'll cover that. Next slide, please. So how do you go about it? You know, what's the roadmap? What does it look like? We believe that we try to make this as seamless as possible. Again, rather than reinventing the wheel, how can this dovetail into your existing management system for food safety or quality? So the first step is applying to the program. This is all electronic, online, digital. You know, you can apply online. Once you apply online, we're going to ask you some questions about your facility, what you're currently doing, and so forth. You'll receive the list of documents in a downloadable PDF manner of the standards, the policies, and so forth, which is the guts of the standard itself, but also explaining what management systems are and how, you know, why we take this approach. Any technical releases that have been happening since our last release of the standard, a self-evaluation checklist and guidance form, so similar to what the auditor would use if coming into your facility. And you would also get our brand standards, which explain, you know, once you've achieved certification, how you can go about using the trademark, different marketing terms and things for your website and so forth. Next slide. You would then, we would then encourage you, hopefully by that point you're talking to one of our customer relations people, and they're helping you through the process. We would then look to enter into a license agreement with the facility so that we understand, you know, what roles and responsibilities everybody has on an ongoing basis. You need to ensure that all your prerequisite programs for HACCP are in place and verify those, the effectiveness of those. And obviously, you'd need to create, you know, start to create or revise those written programs as necessary, or update them as necessary. Training of employees is going to be very important, so you want to make sure that those employees are trained and they know how to talk to the auditor if they're asked any questions. You need to plan your system out, review it, and then validate it. So you need to verify and validate it. And I would recommend scheduling a gap analysis or pre-assessment or pre-audit assessment, so you don't waste your money and time on an audit that may not be successful. And then make sure that you're conducting self-assessments where you've incorporated the gluten control into the internal audit program. So all GFSI standards require a internal audit process, so you need to plug this into that process if you haven't already. And then schedule your audit with one of the third-party auditing companies that are approved in the program. Next slide. Two types of audits. We encourage everybody to combine audits for efficiencies and cost benefits with any of the GFSI audits. You know, or even if you don't have a GFSI audit, but you have your own second-party audit coming in once a year, how can you combine this with that audit? And it's approximately half a day additional or incremental to what you're already doing. But some companies don't have existing food safety systems, and you're going to have to put one in place. And maybe you need to do a standalone audit for the gluten-free. And there's another reason why you might want to do that. You may have just had your GFSI audit, BRC audit was just done, or your FSSC audit was just conducted maybe last week or last month, and you have a customer that needs to get a product to market, and so you have a speed to market issue. So you may want to have a standalone audit today, and then next year combine it, you know, with your existing food safety audit. So that's another reason you may want to do a standalone audit. And that'll take about a day and a half to 2 days, depending on, again, various factors, size, number of employees, and so forth. Next slide. Two types of facilities, dedicated and non-dedicated. Again, we can dedicate it is obvious. No gluten ever enters the facility. Non-dedicated or shared, where it may be shared lines, or maybe just shared storage, or you may have a dedicated line, but it's still a shared facility. So either or. Next. Process. So some of the things that the auditor is going to look for. Focus on the gluten controls, obviously, in addition to your traceability and programs. Very heavily focused on what's coming in the back door, so your supplier approval and raw ingredient verification process. Labeling and packaging, very important. Change management and corrective action plans, especially if you're a non-dedicated facility. How are you managing your production controls, changeover, cleaning, sanitizing, all that type of information, testing, and so forth, and how you manage how you're verifying that cross-contamination is under control. Next slide. Duration and frequency, again, I mentioned earlier the types of audits and durations. Frequency is annual, so you have to have it done on an annual basis. Next slide. So currently we have approximately 15 certifying bodies, some of which you may be familiar with here. Most of the major global players are here, and some regional players in the United States. We are adding to this on an ongoing basis as we adopt more of the BRC approved auditing companies. You know, if you don't see the name of the auditing company here and you're working with them, please have them contact us, and we'd be happy to onboard them as a certifying body. But we currently, there's about 300 auditors, food auditors, that have been trained in the gluten-free program as well around the world, and so I'm hoping that we can add to this as we grow. Next slide, please. So the value proposition in a nutshell, there are two distinct propositions. As I mentioned earlier, one is as a manufacturer, you're going to receive, and as a brand owner, you're going to receive the assurances that you have implemented the most rigorous program for gluten-free in the world, a management system approach that's science-based. And so if I'm a manufacturer or CEO of a manufacturer, at least I'm going to go home and sleep at night. And secondly, from a brand management standpoint, or if you're a category manager or you're a marketing person, how to leverage, and we saw with that Live G-Free example, how you need to be able to leverage the leading celiac organizations, and they need to be able to get behind the product and the brand, and to tell those consumers how great your products are, how they can depend on them for a safe reliable and affordable gluten-free option. Next slide.
We got our final poll question here. We're going to fire off, Paul. So for everybody who is on, if you can give us a quick answer about what stage you're at in the gluten-free certification process. And I know a lot of you are here trying to get some of that information, so it might be on the training side, but if you could give us a little insight here, this would be helpful. Thank you, Jen. And then as we wrap this up, we'll get ready for Q&A. So if you have any questions that you want me to share with Paul, feel free to send those across, and we'll do our best to get to those with the time we have left here. So, all right. And Jen, I think you got the info up there, so thank you for that. And thanks everybody for participating in the polls there. So a little bit of everything up there for you, Paul.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so it looks as though the majority, and that would make sense based on the 50% we heard earlier ready for their audit. 23 are ready for their audit. So that's awesome. Again, I let you know that, you know, if you haven't done a pre-audit assessment, it might be worthwhile to consider that. But again, you know, we will certainly circle back with folks that are needing some training. We're available. We have online options and different things we can help you with, and implementation we can help you with as well. So I think this is a great indicator. Thank you very much for participating.
Yeah, you bet. And I appreciate that. I think you gave us a good set. I know we had people from all across the board. So some that were definitely considering this, some are working on it, some are looking to improve it or make it a little less labor and time intensive. So I think we covered a lot of bases. It's obviously a very big, complex topic. And so we appreciate you touching on all those areas. We have time for a few questions, and I've got some here, Paul, and I'll kind of fire off at random for you before we wrap up. One of which is about suppliers. Do my suppliers need to be certified under this program?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, Brian. We get asked that quite a bit. And what I will tell you is no. This is a voluntary program 100%. However, we do have some of the major retailers for store brands who definitely specify that their suppliers or co-mans and co-packers need to be certified, much like GFSI. I can only tell you as a co-man or a co-packer that you will reduce the amount of time and costs associated with trying to get the assurances you need for the audit if you ask your supplier to also become certified. So again, it's not mandatory, but it really is going to help ease up your job on the front end and help you deal with more of the cross-contamination potential rather than worrying about what's coming in the back door.
That's good. Part of our goal today is to make everyone's job just a little bit easier, so that is good. I guess similar question, but I'll go ahead and ask it that just came in. What about co-packers? Do they need to be certified?
So the answer is yes, and more importantly though, the actual ingredient suppliers or the people that are shipping into that facility for assembly or repacking or whatever the co-packer is doing, depends on the situation and how actively involved that co-packer is in the process. But we certainly have situations in the majority of cases where the supplier to the co-packer has to also go through the process. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that.